They mocked her for years, whispered behind her back, spat the cruelest word. Childless. Yet when death hovered over a rancher's family, it was her hands they begged for. Hands steady as a gunfighter's, heart fierce as the desert sun. Clara Byrne had long learned how to walk with her chin high through the streets of Perdition Creek. The town was little more than a cluster of wooden buildings bleached by desert sun, with dust settling in every crevice and superstition rooted deeper than the mesquite. Folks respected her when they needed her, when a woman screamed in labor, when a newborn gasped for breath, when fever laid a child low. But the respect soured as soon as the crisis passed. Then the whispers returned, carried on porches and over whiskey glasses. Asterisk, she can deliver babies, but never her own. A midwife barren. Ain't that God's cruelest joke? Asterisk, they called her cursed. And curses, in a land where crops withered overnight and coyotes stole lambs from corrals, were not easily forgotten. Clara bore it in silence. Her back was straight as a church steeple, her face calm as still water. Only when she closed the door of her small adobe home at the edge of town did the loneliness creep in, a chill that no fire could quite drive out. She kept her hands busy, drying sage and chamomile, grinding willow bark, folding linens so neat they might have been prepared for royalty. It was the only way to hush the ache that lived deep within, a hollow echo where the laughter of her own children might have been. Yet Clara had seen enough suffering to know every life held its private wounds. The frontier was built on them. Men carrying scars from war, women burying infants in unmarked graves, children learning too young how fragile tomorrow could be. She simply bore her burden openly, for everyone in Perdition Creek to prod and pick apart. One man, however, seemed to avoid even her shadow. Luke Hammond was a rancher carved from the same stubborn clay as the land itself. Tall, broad-shouldered, his skin weathered by years of toil beneath a pitiless sun. His wife's death had hollowed him, left his eyes rimmed with exhaustion and his voice scraped thin. 3 children trailed after him like shadows, their hair tangled, their manners roughened by neglect. Folks in town whispered the Hammond Ranch wouldn't last another season. Too many mouths, too few hands, and a man too broken to stitch his family back together. Luke kept Clara at arm's length. When their paths crossed, he tipped his hat politely enough but never lingered. She knew the look in his eyes, the wary distance of a man who had heard every cruel story told about her and half believed them. Yet she also saw the weariness, the gnawing desperation in the way he watched his children when he thought no one noticed. He loved them, but love alone could not mend what grief had shattered. The town itself hummed with an unease no one dared name too loudly. Travelers spoke of a band of outlaws prowling the canyons. Men who rode under moonlight, rifles slung casual as if they owned the land. They'd stripped cattle from homesteads, burned out a family 2 valleys over. The sheriff kept his voice steady, but his hand twitched toward his gun whenever the subject came up. Everyone knew the Hammond Ranch, standing lonely against the desert horizon, was a ripe target. Clara heard the talk while buying flour at the mercantile. Men laughed too loudly about being ready for a fight. Women clucked their tongues about the sheriff's uselessness. And yet beneath it all was the tremor of fear. She said nothing, only tightened her grip on the flour sack and walked out into the sun, the grit stinging her eyes. As she passed the saloon, a drunk spat tobacco near her boots and sneered, "Empty cradle, empty heart." The laughter that followed gnawed like wolves. She didn't turn, didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing the words land. But that night, alone by lamplight, she opened the old trunk beneath her bed. Inside lay her past. A folded nurse's uniform from the war, stiff with stains that no soap had ever lifted, and a faded ribbon tied around a packet of letters. Her fingers hovered over the fabric, memories rushing. Men crying out in pain, the stench of blood, her husband's face before the telegram told her he'd never return, and the child she'd carried once, lost in the fever that took more than half the camp. She pressed the lid shut before the memories consumed her. Life moved on with the sun, relentless and uncaring. Clara continued her work, delivering babies, tending wounds, gathering herbs from the dry washes where life clung stubbornly to rock. The gossip never stopped, but she grew practiced at ignoring it, like swatting flies. Still, in the quiet hours, her mind drifted toward the Hammond Ranch, toward the ragged children and the man who stumbled under the weight of loss. She felt the pull of it, though she told herself it was none of her concern. That pull became something more the night he came pounding at her door. It was near midnight, the desert air sharp with chill. Clara had just snuffed her lamp when the urgent hammering rattled her door. She opened it to find Luke Hammond, face ashen beneath his hat, eyes wild with fear. "My boy!" he gasped, breath ragged. "My youngest, he's burning up. Fever's taken him. There's no doctor within 50 miles. Please, Miss Byrne. Please." Clara studied him in the lantern light. His shoulders sagged, his hands trembled. Here was a man stripped of every layer of pride, laid bare by desperation. For years he had avoided her, yet now he stood begging on her doorstep. She should have felt vindication. Instead, she felt only the old, familiar ache, because she knew what it was to fear losing someone you loved. She reached for her satchel without a word, checking jars of tinctures, rolls of clean cloth, the scalpel worn smooth from use. Her movements were brisk, practiced, unshaken. "Saddle a horse," she told him firmly. "We ride now." He swallowed hard, nodding once, shame flickering across his features like a shadow. "God bless you," he whispered. She ignored the words. Blessings never saved a man on the battlefield, and they wouldn't save a child tonight. What mattered were steady hands and the will to fight against death itself. As she mounted her horse, the desert stretched out before them, vast and silent under a swollen moon. Luke rode beside her, silent, jaw tight with worry. The only sounds were the rhythm of hooves and the distant cry of coyotes, a reminder that predators always prowled these lands. Clara's eyes stayed fixed on the horizon, but her heart beat hard in her chest. She knew the boy's fever would be fierce, and beyond that, she could feel it, the darker storm gathering, one not born of sickness but of men with guns and lawless hunger. The Hammond Ranch appeared at last, lonely against the barren sweep of land, its fences sagging, lantern light glowing faintly through cracked shutters. Clara dismounted, boots striking dry earth, and stepped inside. The stench of fever hit her instantly, sweat, sickness, fear. The child lay writhing on the bed, cheeks flushed crimson, breath coming in shallow gasps. His siblings huddled nearby, eyes wide and frightened. Clara set her satchel down, rolled up her sleeves, and took command. "Boil water. Fetch clean rags. Keep the fire strong," she ordered, voice steady, leaving no room for argument. Luke obeyed, fumbling but quick, while the children clung to one another, watching her with desperate hope.
The boy's skin was hot as a stove, his breath rattling shallow and uneven, each exhale edged with a faint whimper that cut sharper than any blade. Clara knelt beside the bed, fingers brushing damp hair from his brow, feeling the fever pulse through him like fire. The room smelled of sweat, kerosene, and fear. Luke hovered near the doorway, his hat clutched in his hands as if it were the last thing anchoring him. His eyes, bloodshot and hollow, flicked between his son and the woman he had once avoided like a shadow. "Is he?" His voice broke. He cleared his throat and tried again. "Is he going to make it?" Clara didn't answer immediately. She measured the boy's pulse with 2 fingers, counting heartbeats against the soft tick of the mantel clock. His skin was clammy despite the heat in him, and a faint tremor rattled through his small frame. She set her jaw. "If we break the fever, they'll see another sunrise, but it will take work. You'll do as I say." Luke swallowed hard and nodded. He looked like a man accustomed to giving orders, not taking them, but desperation had ground him down to something raw and malleable. He fetched water, stoked a fire, cut strips of linen when she asked. His hands shook, but he obeyed. The 2 older children, a boy of 12 and a girl a few years younger, lingered at the edge of the room. Their faces were smudged with dust, their eyes guarded. They studied Clara with suspicion, as though weighing whether she was a savior or a curse dragged across their threshold. She caught their gaze but offered no forced smile, no cooing comfort. Instead, she let them watch her work, The calm way she measured drops of tincture, the certainty with which she cooled their brother's skin, the steady rhythm of her voice when she urged the boy to sip water between fevered groans. Hours passed like lifetimes. Outside, dusk bled into night, coyotes yipping in the distance, their cries carried on the restless wind. The Hammond ranch creaked under the weight of silence, broken only by the boy's labored breathing and the clatter of Clara's tools. Between tasks, Clara's mind drifted unbidden into old corridors of memory. Lantern lights spilling across canvas tents, the air thick with the copper tang of blood and smoke. The war had been a crucible, turning her from farmer's daughter into nurse, then into something harder still. She had stitched men together while cannon fire shook the earth, had pressed cloth against wounds that spurted life away faster than her hands could contain it. Death had been her companion, her teacher. It was there she had learned not just how to save life, but how to steel herself when life slipped beyond reach. And it was there she had lost the man she loved, along with the child she had carried inside her, buried before the world even knew it lived. The memories pressed heavy as she wrung a cloth into the basin, but she shoved them back into the shadows of her heart. She could not afford them now. The boy needed her hand steady, her mind sharp. She whispered words into his ear, half command, half prayer. "Hold on, little one. The fever doesn't get to win." By dawn, the boy's breathing had steadied, his fever ebbing in fragile waves. Clara's own body ached from the long night, her eyes burning from lack of sleep. But when she saw the faint flush of natural color return to the child's cheeks, relief surged through her like cool water after drought. She pressed her palm gently against his brow, warm still, but no longer blazing, and allowed herself the faintest smile. Luke exhaled a breath he had held for hours, his shoulders sagging as if the weight of the world had finally loosened its grip. His voice cracked when he whispered, "You saved him." Clara shook her head. "No. He fought. I only gave him the chance." The words were simple, but Luke's gaze lingered on her, heavy with something more than gratitude. He opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again, as though the words caught on thorns inside him. Instead, he turned away, busying himself with pouring water into the basin. The other children drew closer at last, curiosity overtaking fear. The girl hovered at Clara's side, fingers twitching near the hem of her sleeve, before she dared to touch it. Clara looked down, meeting wide eyes that reflected both wonder and suspicion. She said nothing, only allowed the child to stay close, to see that her presence carried no curse. The boy, older and protective, lingered near the doorway, arms crossed, but his eyes softened when he saw his brother sleeping peacefully for the first time in days. For a fleeting moment, Clara felt something stir inside her chest. It was not joy exactly, but something sharper, more dangerous, the fragile ache of belonging. She pushed it down, reminding herself it was not her place. She had been called here to mend, not to stay. That evening, as the sun fell red across the desert, rumors rode in with a passing traveler. A gang of outlaws had been spotted south of the canyon, moving steadily toward Perdition Creek. They had already burned one homestead, stolen cattle from another. Their numbers weren't great, but they carried rifles and rode like men who feared neither God nor law. Luke listened with a tight jaw, his hand resting unconsciously near the rifle propped against the wall. When the traveler left, silence filled the room like smoke. He finally said, "If they come this way, they'll come for me. Ranch is weak. Cattle are lean. Fences half-broke. Easy pickings." Clara studied him. His voice was steady, but she saw the truth in his eyes. Fear gnawed at him, sharp as wolves at a carcass. He had buried his wife, nearly lost his son, and the thought of losing everything else left him standing on a precipice he did not know how to cross. "You'll need more than a rifle," Clara said at last. Luke bristled. "I can handle." She cut him off with a look so sharp it silenced him. "I've seen men handle worse, Hammond. Seen them die clutching their rifles while their families burned. You want to protect your children? Then listen." The firmness in her tone left no room for argument. She began pacing the room, eyes flicking over doorways, windows, the layout of the ranch. She spoke with the clarity of a soldier rather than a midwife. Where to place lanterns to blind riders, how to stack furniture for cover. where the children should hide if shots rang out. Her words carried the weight of memory, the battlefield etched into every command. Luke stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. Not the barren midwife mocked by town gossips, but a woman forged in fire, carrying scars no one else could see. His pride, fragile as glass, bent beneath the pressure of her authority. Slowly, he nodded. "All right," he murmured. "Tell me what to do." Clara turned to the children, kneeling so her eyes met theirs. "You'll stay close, you hear? When I say hide, you hide. When I say run, you run. No questions." The older boy swallowed, his chin lifting with a courage beyond his years. "Yes, ma'am." The girl clung to Clara's sleeve, nodding with wide eyes. In that dim room, beneath the weight of coming violence, a strange kind of unity took root. Clara felt it pulse through her, a bond not born of blood but of shared resolve. For years she had carried the weight of being called cursed, of being treated as less than whole. Yet here, in this fragile family's hour of need, it was her strength they leaned upon, her voice they followed.
The moon hung pale and swollen over the desert, its light washing the Hammond Ranch in silver and shadow. The air was tight with waiting, every creak of the windmill, every shuffle of hooves beyond the fence sounding like a harbinger of what was to come. Inside the house, lanterns were dimmed, shutters barred, rifles checked and rechecked. Luke stood at the window, his face drawn and grim, knuckles white on the rifle stock. The children sat huddled together in the back room, wide-eyed but silent, their fear restrained by Clara's firm instructions. She moved with measured purpose through the house, placing lanterns near windows where their glare would blind an approaching rider, laying out strips of torn cloth, jars of salve, and her scalpel on the table as if preparing for surgery. Every gesture carried the calm precision of someone who had stared chaos in the eye before and learned how to make it bow. The first sound came like a drumbeat across the earth, hooves pounding the hard-packed ground, growing louder, closer. A dog barked in the distance, sharp and frantic. Then voices, carried on the night wind, crude and jeering. Shadows on horseback emerged at the edge of the ranch, a dozen riders or more, rifles gleaming beneath the moon. "Come on out, Hammond," one bellowed, his voice thick with menace. "You've got what belongs to us, cattle, land, whatever's left of value. Hand it over, and maybe we leave you breathing." Luke's jaw clenched. He raised his rifle, but his hands trembled. Clara saw it, saw the hesitation gnawing at him, the weight of his losses dragging him down. She stepped closer, her voice low but sharp. "Steady. They feed on fear. Don't give it to them." But fear had already taken root. When the first shot cracked through the night, splintering wood from the barn, Luke flinched and fired back too soon. His bullet went wide. A return shot whined through the air, striking the window frame, and shards of glass cut across Luke's cheek. He stumbled back, blood streaking his face. The children cried out from the back room. Clara grabbed the rifle from Luke's hands before his panic could waste another bullet. She set him against the wall, pressing cloth to his wound. "You'll live," she muttered, her tone clipped. "But I'll need you steady enough to keep breathing. Leave the rest to me." She strode to the window, shoulders squared, eyes fierce. Another shot rang out from the dark, and she answered with quick precision, firing into the shadows where a rider's silhouette shifted. A cry split the air, followed by the thud of a body hitting dirt. "Damn," muttered another outlaw, his voice carrying. "The midwife's got teeth." The siege began in earnest then. Bullets tore into the house, shattering shutters and sending wood splinters flying. Clara shouted for the children to stay down, her voice cutting through the storm of noise. She moved like a commander, positioning Luke where he could cover a window without exposing himself, loading spare rifles, barking instructions as calmly as if she were back in a field hospital under cannon fire. When one outlaw tried to sneak along the fence, Clara spotted his shadow stretching long across the sand. She pulled the lantern from the sill and hurled it into the yard, shattering it at his feet. Flames leapt hungrily, throwing him into stark relief. Luke fired from behind her command, the shot striking true. The outlaw fell, screaming as the fire ate at the dry weeds around him. Inside, Clara kept moving, her mind calculating with soldier's precision. She ordered the children to carry water buckets to the windows, to stay low and pour them where embers caught. She checked Luke's wound between volleys, her hands swift, unfaltering, smearing salve and tying cloth without losing pace in the fight. The outlaws pressed harder, circling the house, whooping like wolves. But Clara had lived through worse. She remembered the war, the nights when tents shook with cannon fire, when men screamed her name as she worked in pools of blood. She remembered the telegram that had told her of her husband's death, the fever that had stolen her unborn child, the endless days when grief became her shadow. Pain had hollowed her, but it had also forged her into iron. And iron does not bend easily. Through it all, the Hammond children watched her with growing awe. The girl clung to her sleeve between tasks, whispering, "Don't leave us," and Clara answered with a quiet fierceness, "Not while breath's in me." The older boy, trembling but resolute, carried ammunition to her side, his small hands steadying as he copied her courage. Just before dawn, the sound of more horses approached, not outlaws but neighbors. Men from the edge of town, rifles slung, faces grim. They had come late, wary at first of risking themselves for a man like Luke, for a woman many had called cursed. But the sight that met them, the midwife commanding the defense, standing tall in the smoke and firelight, rallying children and wounded rancher alike, froze them in astonishment. "She's leading them," one man muttered, disbelieving. And in that moment, something shifted. The townsfolk who had whispered scorn now saw her truth, raw and undeniable. Clara Byrne was no barren curse, no hushed jest. She was the steel that held life together when everything else fell apart. The neighbors joined the fight, and the tide turned. Outlaws, once bold, faltered as bullets rained from more guns, as lantern light flared bright against the dawn. 2 men fled into the desert night. Another lay groaning in the dust, and the rest scattered when they realized their prey had teeth sharper than their own. When the final shot echoed away into silence, the ranch stood bruised but unbroken. Smoke curled from the fence, glass littered the ground, and blood darkened the dirt where men had fallen. Inside, the children clung to Clara, their small arms wrapping tight around her waist. She dropped her rifle at last, her body trembling with fatigue, but her eyes still burned with that unyielding fire. Luke, pale and bloodied, pushed himself upright and looked at her as though seeing her for the first time. His voice was rough, choked with gratitude. You saved us." Clara met his gaze, and for the first time let the truth of her past slip free. "I've lost more than most, Hammond. A husband, a child I never held. War took them from me, and left me with nothing but these hands and the will to use them. If I can keep another family from knowing that emptiness, then I'll fight as long as I breathe." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the rustle of dawn wind against the scorched earth. Around her, the men from town lowered their rifles, eyes softened with something that looked almost like shame. One by one, they nodded, small gestures, but enough to say they understood what words could not. The sky blushed with morning as Clara stepped out into the yard, the desert stretching endless before her. Her skirts were torn, her hands blackened with soot and blood, but she stood unbowed. For years, they had mocked her as childless, cursed. Tonight, they had seen her true self, not defined by what she lacked, but by what she endured, by what she gave. And as the first light spilled over the broken land, Clara Byrne became more than the midwife they had scorned. She became legend. The night had broken at last, leaving silence heavy over the Hammond ranch. Smoke clung to the rafters, acrid and sharp, while the yard bore the scars of battle, shattered glass, splintered wood, and the dark stains of blood soaking into the thirsty earth. The outlaws were gone, scattered into the desert with their pride in tatters and their dead left behind. The ranch still stood, battered but upright, like the man and woman who had defended it. Clara lowered the rifle she had carried through the long siege and leaned against the doorway, every muscle trembling with exhaustion. Her hands, those same hands that had delivered children and held the dying, were blackened with soot and streaked with blood not her own. The weight of the night pressed upon her shoulders, yet beneath it flickered something fierce. Not triumph, but endurance. She had not bent. She had not broken. Luke limped forward, bandages stark against his temple, his eyes fixed on her with a rawness that no words could mask. For so long he had kept distance between them, fueled by pride and poisoned by the town's gossip. Now, standing amid the wreckage, he saw her clearly. His voice cracked when he spoke. "You didn't just save my boy. You saved me. I would have lost everything, Clara. Everything." Clara held his gaze, steady and unflinching. "You still have your children. Hold on to them, Luke. Don't let grief steal them the way it nearly stole you." For a long moment he said nothing, only nodded, as if her words struck deeper than any sermon or prayer ever could. The children clung to her, their small faces pressed into her skirts, their eyes wide with a devotion that had not existed the day before. They had watched her stand in the firelight, unyielding against men twice her size, and they would never see her as anything less than protector. Clara smoothed a hand over their tangled hair, her touch gentle now, the battlefield quiet behind her. When dawn crept across the horizon, neighbors and townsfolk gathered, drawn by the echoes of gunfire that had rattled the night. They came expecting to find ruin, perhaps death, but instead they saw Clara Burns standing in the yard, her figure outlined by the rising sun. They stared at the broken ranch and the weary survivors, then at her, the woman they had mocked for years. Whispers rose, not the barbed kind she had grown accustomed to, but hushed tones edged with awe. Midwife saved them, held off the whole gang, stood like a soldier. The words spread like wildfire, reshaping themselves as they traveled, growing larger with each retelling. Already the legend was taking root. The barren midwife who fought like a warrior, who turned her curse into strength, who saved a ranch when no one else dared. Clara felt their eyes, but she did not bask in them. Respect, like scorn, was as fickle as desert rain. What mattered were the children safe inside, the man who had found his footing again, and the knowledge that when death had come prowling, she had not faltered. As the sun rose higher, gilding the desert in light, Clara saddled her horse. Luke tried to protest, words half-formed on his lips, but she silenced him with a look that brooked no argument. "Your family needs you now," she said simply. "My work here is done." The children ran after her as she mounted, their small hands reaching, their voices pleading for her to stay. She leaned down, touched their cheeks with calloused fingers, and offered the faintest smile. "Be brave," she whispered. "You know how now." Then she turned her horse toward the open desert. Dust rose beneath the hooves, curling into the dawn air. Her shadow stretched long across the earth, tall and unbroken, a figure carved in grit and sunlight. Behind her, the whispers swelled, weaving her into story even as she rode away. They had mocked her once, called her cursed, childless, less than whole. But history remembers differently. History remembers the woman who saved a ranch, who faced down the darkness and stood unafraid. And as the desert swallowed her silhouette, Clara Byrne became more than flesh and bone. She became legend,